Okay, sorry, a little bit of a technical difficulty there. Good, I think we're live. Are we going? Somebody let me know if you're listening, if this is actually working. I would like it to be recording. So we're beginning the book of Exodus. We finished the book of Genesis. It was wonderful. And now we're heading into this incredible book called the Book of Shemot. So as we know, a lot of the Torah, way in which the Torah is split up, so that we read a little bit every week, has a name. And the name of the Torah reading of each week comes from normally a word in the first sentence of that reading. So this week's reading begins, and these are the names of the children of Israel who were coming to Egypt. With Jacob, each man and his household came. And then it lists the names of the son, Reuven and Shimon and Levi and Judah and Yisachar and Zebulun and Benjamin and Dan and Naphtali and Gad and Asher and Joseph. So we name all the sons, but it's an and. There's a conjunction. It begins the beginning of this week's book, this week's Torah portion, and it's a continuation from the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis, this is a continuation of that book, meaning that the family that began to come down to Egypt, the family that we learned about from Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and all the brothers and how they came to Egypt. And then Jacob dies in last week's Torah portion, and he blesses his children, he blesses his grandsons that come from his beloved son Joseph, from his beloved wife Rachel. He blesses Ephraim and Manasseh, and then he dies. And at the end of last week's Torah portion, we also have the death of Joseph. So now, so these are the people that are in Egypt. Who are these people? They're the same people that came down. We learned about them before. Why do we have to name them again? So all of the commentators agree that the reason that we're naming the people over again, while this book is called the book of names, Shemot, of what they were called, is because the essence of a person is their name. And this is a very kind of mystical, on some level, Jewish concept that we have, that our names represent who we are. At our core, at our essence, is who we are, is our name. Where do we get our names from? Who gives us our names? And many times, our Jewish tradition is that we're named after people. We're named after people that we I'm trying to actually get... Sorry, I'm trying to get this to work, but I don't think it's going to work. I'm going to give up on this. I'm trying to put it on YouTube, but it doesn't seem to be working. So I'll just keep going. Okay. We're named, Jewish people are most often named after a person in their background, a famous person perhaps from Jewish history, an ancestor. We're named after our ancestors, which is an incredible thing, meaning that there's some desire that our parents have, and we have a concept of Ruach HaKodesh. We have a concept that when a parent names their child, or when anybody names a child, that we're imbuing them with certain character traits. And oftentimes we say, this parent, this grandparent, this uncle, this aunt, this rabbi, this ancestor has certain qualities and certain character traits, and I want those character traits to be manifest in my child that's here. So we look into the future. When we name our children, we look into the future and we say, what are the names that we're giving our children? What kind of people do we want them to be? Do we want them to be people who are like the people that we know? So yes, there's lots of people called Jacob, but when we name our children, we have perhaps in our mind a certain character that goes along with that name, and we bless our children with a name such that they'll take that name with them into the future. We want that name to be a name that they'll take with them. So when we now relearn the names, and we don't need to relearn the names, it wasn't so long ago that we read about all of the 70 souls that came down to Egypt with Jacob. We don't need to read them all over again. So the reason why it's given is that it's given all over again is because God loves each one of us. And by reiterating our names, the names of the souls that came down to Egypt, he's saying, I love each one. I want to highlight each one. I want each one to know how much I love them. Just like if we have people that we love, sometimes we might count them over, or we might think about them, or we might kind of keep remembering who they are and keep bringing them up in our minds, because we love them so much that we keep kind of thinking about them and reiterating them in our consciousness, in our memories, whether they're alive or dead. We think about them, and they come alive for us. And this level of love for each one, it's interesting if you look back in the Torah, when Abraham was shown by God a prophecy that one day his descendants would be like the stars of the heavens. And you look outside, you see billions of stars. Like this is the promise. This is the promise that God gave Abraham way back in Genesis. Is the promise that we would be as numerous as the stars in the heavens. And so what's happening in the book of Exodus is that we've gone from being this family of 70 souls, came from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now and into Egypt, with all the names being recounted. Here are the names. Here are these stars. Each Jewish person is a star in the cosmos. Each one has a particular light to shine. Each one is unique. Each one has its own strengths and its own light and its own capacity to change the world. Each one is important, and each one needs to be counted. And that's what God's telling us. Like, yes, we all have names, and our names are important. And if you look at what Hitler, Yamach Shemo, did to the Jewish people, he took away their names. Right? When we went into the concentration camps, what was one of the first things they did? They took away our names, and they gave us numbers, which is like digs deep into the consciousness of the Jewish people. The Jewish people are known by our names. They're names that come and go, they come around. They come around. Our Jewish names. Yes, we may have secular American names, but most of us have a Hebrew name or a Jewish name. And if you don't have one, you should get one, because it's your essence. It's who you are. Who are you deep down is your Jewish name. So if you don't have a Jewish name, I recommend that you get one. And it defines you. It defines you. And if you haven't got one already, you have the luxury of deciding who it is that you are, what it is that you want to be, how you want to shine, what kind of star are you in the cosmos, what kind of star do you want to be to shine out into the world. And that's what our names do for us. So this book is called the Book of Names, the Book of Names, because each one of us is unique and important. And what's happening when we come down to Egypt as a family, and we're 70 souls come down, and then Jacob dies last week, Joseph dies last week, all the brothers die, and what happens is now the Pharaoh, we learn, forgets about Joseph. Is that true? Is it possible that he could forget about Joseph? It says that Joseph died, and all his brothers and the entire generation. I'm reading right out of the Torah. The children of Israel were fruitful, teemed, increased, and became strong, very, very much so, and the land became filled with them. There were so many Jewish people that came from this family. Now we're becoming a nation. Now we're growing. We're becoming an entity, not just a family. And a new king arose over Egypt who did not know of Joseph. Is it true that it was a new king? There's a lot of commentary. Was he new? Was he the same king, but he didn't want to recognize Joseph, that Joseph had sort of somehow receded into the background, and there wasn't a sense of that kind of the Jewish people. It says that the Jewish people at that time, they kept, like I said, they kept their names. That was a very important component for them, maintaining their distinction and their entity. They kept their clothes, the specific, I don't know what kind of clothing they had, but a distinctive kind of clothing, their names, and their language. They kept their language as a separate language, and that they didn't intermarry, that they stayed and they didn't betray each other. They were very much a unit. And then over time, now this Pharaoh who sees himself as a king, he sees himself actually as a deity, as a god, and he has no patience for these people that are growing and multiplying, and he's fearful of them. It says that he's worried that they're going to become numerous and strong, and they're going to take over, and they're going to wage war against us and go up from the land. And so what's interesting in our day of anti-Semitism is how much we might be in the upper echelons of government, or we might be people who have integrated into society, and we have relationships with people, but we always have to be careful. Not everybody is our friend, and not everybody loves the Jewish people. And if we're rich, or we're poor, or we're this, or we're that, or we're educated, or we're not, or we're still seen to be, I believe, and I think it's important for us as a people to stay together and be responsible for each other and take care of each other and look after each other, which we're seeing in our day as we're facing persecution around the world. The Jewish people, I hope, are coming together, and we see that in this week's Torah portion. We see later on when Moses is very aware of his brethren, etc. He wants to protect them, wants to take care of them. He's not a bystander. He's not letting things go by. So should we. But I don't want to get into that conversation right now. So what happens is that Pharaoh starts the slow slide, maybe not so slow slide, into enslaving the Jewish people. So they go from people who were part of the Egyptian culture, they were integrated into the culture. Yes, they had their own language and their own clothes and their own names, but they were also part of the society. And slowly they become enslaved. They start to become seen as vermin. They get seen as other from the Egyptians, and the Egyptians are then have license to continue to enslave us and crush us with oppressive work and oppressive conditions. And one of the things it says about them, I think in the Medrash, is that the work that they did was very meaningless. It says that they had to make bricks, and they had to build these storehouses. And they built on ground that was very marshy. And so when they built marshy land, it sank, and the building would fall down. They'd have to build it again. So it's like they didn't do anything worthwhile. They didn't do anything of meaning. And how demoralizing! The whole point of Pharaoh and his enslavement and his crushing oppression was to crush their spirit and give them work that was meaningless. And so if we just kind of like come into our lives and we say, like, what is when we're engaged in activities, we want it to be meaningful. We want what we do to be something that gives us a sense that we're doing something that's necessary, that's important, that's meaningful. It doesn't have to be a big project of, saving the world. It can be helping a person. It can be attaching, praying. It can be lighting the Shabbat candles. It can be like all of these things in our lives give us a sense that we have the freedom to choose to do meaningful things, and how lifting and enriching and sustaining that is for us to have activities and things built into our day and into our lives that we feel like we're doing something meaningful. And again, it doesn't have to be changing the world, in a big way. It could be very little ways. Like big people are filled with little acts. And actually, if we I just want to jump forward, because it happens in this week Torah portion where Moses, we have both of Moses in this week Torah portion, and we have Moses as a shepherd, and he's shepherding the sheep of his father-in-law Jethro in Midian, and he's this big flock of sheep, and one of the sheep kind of wanders off or goes off, and he follows that one sheep. He doesn't say, one sheep, I'll just keep watching the flock that's over here. He's concerned about this one sheep, and he goes and he follows this one sheep, and it turns out the sheep is thirsty and was looking for some water and found water and was drinking this water. And Moses is very aware of this one little sheep, and he doesn't let go of it and say it doesn't matter. Like, he cares about each one. That's one thing to take into account. And the other thing is, why was he in the desert? Like, should have been, maybe for his flock, he should have been in an area that had more grass and more whatever the sheep eat, I guess grass and water and stuff. It should have been a more appealing place for the sheep to go. And one of the commentators say that he went into the desert because the desert is ownerless. There's nobody owns the desert. And Moses was very careful that the sheep shouldn't be grazing on land that was owned by somebody, and that shouldn't be, quote unquote, stealing, I guess literally stealing the grass or stealing the area or going trespassing onto somebody else's land. And so in order to be really, really, really sure that he wasn't going into anybody's land, he took the sheep into the desert, right? And it's unbeknownst to anybody. We read about it in the Torah. How he took the sheep into the desert. And one of the ways of interpreting that is the small act of being aware that you have to act with justice, and you have to act correctly, and you can't steal. And it's a very small act, but it was a very big act. So here's Moses. Not only is he concerned for each little sheep and this particular sheep, and in the end, when he goes and he sees that the sheep wanted to just have some water, and that's why he wandered off, this sheep wandered off, so he recognizes the sheep must be very tired. He thinks about the sheep, he picks the sheep up and he carries him back. And in that scene we have the incidents of the burning bush, which I want to come to later, if we have time. I hope we do have time. So we have the idea, we have the idea of each individual act being an important thing. An important aspect of our lives is engaging in acts that are meaningful, taking care of other people, looking about other people, checking in on other people, expanding our sense of I, so it doesn't just include us. Pharaoh this evil Pharaoh who takes over the land and becomes like the deity and the despot, and he's all about him, and it's all his, like I Pharaoh own everything, and I'm like a god, etc., etc. His sense of I is very limited and very tiny. It's him. Like he becomes very encased within his own sense of self. Like everything I do and I say, there's nothing bigger than him. There's nothing, beyond him. There's nothing that transcends him. In his mind, he is the be all and end all. And how limiting is that? And juxtapose Pharaoh with our Moses, with maybe all people who choose to recognize and empathize with other people. And Moses is the antithesis of Pharaoh. So Pharaoh's this narrow-minded, arrogant, self-concerned, very full of himself kind of despot, and Moses is the caring and the loving and the expansive. Like his sense of I includes all the Jewish people, and in fact includes all people. We'll come to that in a minute, but not just him, obviously, and not just his family, but all, and not just his brethren, but all people, and the sense of justice. And he takes care when he, again, we'll come to this, when he flees from Egypt, he goes to Midian, and he goes to the well in Midian. Doesn't everybody always go to a well? And they go to the well in Midian, and there are the daughters of Jethro who are being abused by some locals, and he intercedes. He doesn't let it go. He stands up for justice. Like he's a man who just doesn't notice something or ignore something, but he acts. So that's an important component of a character trait that we should learn from. When we see something unjust happening, we should act. And so we have Pharaoh, his Pharaoh who comes and he starts the enslavement of the Jewish people, and they're engaged in this meaningless work, which is very demoralizing. And he issues a decree because he gets a prophecy or something from his nevuah, from his magicians, etc., that the Redeemer of the people will be born, and so he issues a decree that all baby boys born to the Jewish people will be killed. Like he wants all the baby boys killed. And let's see if I can read that inside. So they embittered their lives with hard work, with mortar and bricks. We read this at the Passover Seder. And with every labor of the field, all the labors they performed with them were with crushing harshness. And we only have to look at the Holocaust to see how awful it is. And actually just watched, I highly recommend a movie I just saw called Harriet, about Harriet Tubman and what it was like for before the Civil War. She was a slave in Maryland, and she sees the oppression of her people and the slavery that happened, and what kinds of lives they lead, and how embittered they were, and how crushed they were, and demoralized they were. They didn't have freedom, and they were owned by other people, etc., etc. This and some was the experience of us as a Jewish people. So I think I just want to interject here, as much as we talk about this, that the history of our Jewish people, the history, right? It goes back, but we are told to remember, and in that word memory is me. It's me. I'm part of this memory. This is who I am. I come from somewhere. I'm part of that chain that came back. I'm part of that people, and to have a sense that we are connected back to our history, and that we're part of that lineage. We're part of the history of the world. We're part of a story that is unfolding, and God is in charge, and God's following it through, and God's watching, and God's involved, and God's part of it. So our part in it is a part of it. We're part of something much bigger than each one of ourselves. And so we have a responsibility to act and live and do certain things that kind of bring the world along, that connect us to the divine, that bring us out of a sense of just kind of like complacency, but to keep moving and keep striving, keep doing and keep acting against injustice, and to be good and do good and shine light and all of those things. It's not just here and now, it's part of a much bigger picture, and we're part of that picture. And our story and our importance of remembering the story and reliving the story and being part of the story is what we do every year when we read the Torah, and obviously on Passover when we sort of enact it, and it's much more of a part of a focus of our day. Although every day in our prayers we recognize the fact that God brought us out of the land of Egypt. So the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of the first was Shiphrah and the name of the second was Puah, And he said, when you deliver the Hebrew women and you see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you are to kill him, and if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and they did not do as the king of Egypt spoke to them, and they caused the boys to live. It's an amazing, amazing thing. So first of all, Shifra and Puah, these are names the Egyptians gave them. This was not the names, they were not their Jewish names. Their Jewish names were Yocheved, who was Moses' mother, and Miriam, who was Moses' sister. So Yocheved and Miriam are these characters, Shifra and Puah, and the names that the Egyptians gave them, Shifra and Puah. So Shifra means that she was somebody who beautified the children, like she washed them and she smoothed them and she stroked them, and these babies were like her babies. Puah, poo-poo, like she whispered to them and she cooed to them and she loved them. And so the names are very, on some level, onomatopoeic, like they have an essence of who they were as people, Shifra and Puah. And they loved these children, and they feared God. As much as Pharaoh saying you have to kill them, and there's this whole edict going on, like these are the people who stood up. Just like we might be in our own minds, we can look back at the people who stood up to the Nazis and were able to hide people and take care of people and shelter people and feed people and do whatever they did and help people escape and all the amazing things that the amazing people did. Shifra and Puah, people that stood up to this Pharaoh, this on the edicts that he was issuing, that they would be killed if they went against his decree. They went against his decree anyway, because they feared God. God was the foundation of their lives. As much as they had Pharaoh, who was a fearful character in their lives, they feared God more, and that's the foundation of the Jewish people. And it says that in response to them not following through on Pharaoh's edict, and following through on that, they were blessed with houses. It says they were given houses. I'll read it to you. And it was because the midwives feared God that he made them houses. What does that mean, houses? It means that from them, from Yocheved and from Miriam, came kings, came priests, came the Levites. They were the descendants of Yocheved and Miriam, meaning that when they feared God, that God became an integral aspect of the Jewish people going forward, and that this was a foundation of who we are as Jewish people. And that's how we can survive all through our Jewish history, with all the pogroms and all the anti-Semitism and all the hatred that's being leveled at us. We have God sort of like in our sphere, in our lives, always with us, and that our relationship to God is what sustains us. So the midwives were able to focus on the relationship with God in defiance of their fear of a man, Pharaoh, who was obviously a man, and do what was right and do what was just. So they didn't kill the little babies when they were born. They didn't do that. So what does Pharaoh do? He says, okay, fine. So then it's not going to do that. So what we'll do is we'll throw all the babies into the river. We'll throw all the baby boys into the River Nile. So now the next chapter. So what's going to happen? We have a terrible situation for the Jewish people. They're enslaved on crushing, harsh, oppressive labor. They have meaningless labor. They're losing their ability to function as regular human beings. They're just working all the time, just work. So a man from the house of Levi took a daughter of the house of Levi, and the woman conceived and gave birth to a son. And she saw that he was good, and she hid him for 3 months. She could not hide him any longer, so she took him a wicker basket and smeared it with clay and pitch, and she placed the child into it and placed it among the reeds of the river, the bank of the river. His sister stationed herself at a distance to know what would be done with him. We don't have any names. There's no names here, right? So there's a daughter and a son who marry and they have a child, and the sister's watching, like no names. So this baby that's born is our Moses. He's our Redeemer. He's the man who's going to bring the Jewish people out from this slavery. And he's shining. He says she saw she was good. She saw that he was good. So there's a lot of commentary on this. The Medrash tells us that when Moses was born, he shone. He had a light that emanated from him. He was a special child. He was born circumcised. It says the whole room lit up with this special light. So I love this stuff. If you go back to the creation of the world, on the second day of creation, there was a light that was created that was not the light that came from the sun. It was a spiritual light, a very powerful spiritual light from which one could see from one end of the world to the other, whatever that means. But this is a light that reappears. It was put away. And when Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden, they were expelled from the Garden of Eden. After the first Shabbat, that light that was created on the second day was hidden away. And it comes out at certain times. It comes out on Hanukkah. The Hanukkah menorah say that light on the Hanukkah menorah is this spiritual light that was hidden away after that first Shabbat of creation. And Moses, when he was born, emanated this light, this spiritual light that came forth from him. So it says that Moses was born on the 6th day of the month of Adar. So Adar is a Jewish month. It's actually it's the next month, is the month of Adar. And on the 6th day of Adar, Moses was born. So this light emanated. So there's one story in Medrash that says that he was born 3 months early. So the Egyptians knew which Jewish women were pregnant and knew when they were about to give birth. And Moses' mother Yocheved, gave birth to Moses 3 months early. So she was able to hide him because they didn't come looking, because she was 3 months early. And he was born perfect. He was born with this light shining and circumcised, and she was able to hide him away for 3 months. So 3 months takes us to the 6th of Sivan, which is the day of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. It's the day of Shavuos. So for 3 months, this baby Moses is shining his light into the world. And at that 3-month mark, they realize that the Egyptians are going to come and they're going to search the houses and look for this baby that they knew was about to be born or going to be born. And so she then hides the baby in this ark, in this little teva, in this little basket, and puts it on the river Nile. We all know the story. And what we understand from this, let me just go back a step, that when this decree was issued that the babies would be killed, that the babies would be thrown in the Nile, so Miriam, who's the daughter of Yocheved and Amram, who are these unnamed parents in this beginning of this paragraph, she says to her parents, because they divorce, they say, we're not bringing babies into this world. It's a terrible world. We don't want to bring babies into this world. It's bringing them into a life of misery, etc. And Miriam says, no, you can't do that. And she's apparently about 6 years old, and she complains to her parents. She says, you can't do that because Pharaoh is only issuing an edict against the boys, right? So we still have girls that are being born. And you, by not marrying and not bearing children, are wiping out all the Jewish people, both boys and girls. So by her argument, by her amazing ability to look into the future, she's a prophetess, Miriam the prophetess. She sees into the future and she tells her parents, this is wrong, you can't do this. And she explains to them what, and they listen to her, and they're very prominent people. Amram is a very prominent man in the Jewish people, in the Hebrews, and they remarry, have a very big wedding. It's apparently Miriam and her brother, little brother Aaron, are dancing at the wedding. It's a very public wedding, so that other people will see that they should also get remarried, and they all get remarried. And but it's about the future. As much as we look back and we talk about history and we talk about memory, and we're part of that memory, but our people, our life is a part of a story that has a future that's still unfolding. We're still part of that story that's still unfolding. And so we have to continue to have babies. We have to continue to have faith and perseverance and resilience and keep having children. Apparently, not sure if this is true, but in the POW camps after, maybe not POW, in the camps that were set up after the Second World War, after the concentration camps were liberated, that people started having babies, like lots of babies, and they're like, we got to start again, we're going to keep going. I mean, it makes you want to cry, like this idea of like we have to keep going, like we're beaten and we're oppressed and we're pushed down, but we're going to keep going. We're going to have hope, and we're going to look into the future, and we're going to keep striving for the future, because we have faith that there's going to be a better, it's going to improve, it's going to be good. So that's, an amazing story of Miriam, this prophetess at age 6, and she's saying to her parents, you have to remarry, you have to have children, and they have a child, and they have Moses, and he's shining, his face shines out. He has this light that was from the second day of creation that's shining out into the world, and he gets put into this basket and he gets put into the River Nile. And Miriam watches over him. She goes and she watches from the side of the river. She looks over her baby brother. And just if you just think about this image of not turning your back, right? So we have this little baby. What's going to become of this little baby? On one level, Miriam has, our prophetess, she has a vision of what will be. She has a prophecy of what will be, that he's going to be the redeemer of the Jewish people. So on one level, maybe she's watching to see what's going to happen of her prophecy on one level. And on the other level, she's watching over her brother. And I think this is a bigger concept for us as the Jewish people. Like, we should be watching out for each other, right? And or just humanity in general, but, start with family. We look out for us. We look out for our family. We look out for each other. We look out for what's happening in the world to other people and how to make it better, and not to turn our back on people, and not see the pain of another. And Miriam is very concerned about her baby brother, and she goes to watch. She doesn't turn away. She keeps watching what's going to happen to my baby brother. And I want to link Miriam, who is watching and and concerned and wants to kind of, what's my role here? I'm waiting for a role. What's my role going to be? Back to the two amazing women, Shifra and Puah, who are really Yocheved and Miriam, who are not abiding by Pharaoh's decree to kill the babies that were being born, and that they overruled, or they didn't want to listen to, or weren't able to follow through on the decrees of Pharaoh, and feared God and saved them and looked after the babies, and Shifra beautified them, and Puah cooed to them that they were the babies, that they were our babies, and we're going to take care of them. We're not going to turn our backs on them. So here we have Miriam stationed to watch, see what's going to happen. What happens is Pharaoh's daughter, Batya, she comes down from the palace and she comes down to bathe in the river. So Batya, we understand, apparently there's some midrashim that say that Batya was very unhappy living in the palace. She didn't believe in Pharaoh and all his, I'm the deity, I'm the god, I'm this and that. And she goes into the river to shed herself of the idolatry of the palace. She uses the river as a kind of a mikveh. Like, she wants to wash herself free from the shtus, from the dirt and the grime and the idolatry that she's subjected to in the palace. So she goes into the River Nile and she sees this little ark. She sees this little basket, and she reaches. So there's again the word used for reaching with her arm, whether the maidservant she sends to go get the basket or whether she reaches for the basket. And there's a medrash that a lot of children learn in Hebrew school, that her arm miraculously extended so that it could reach the basket and pull the basket towards her. But whether or not it's the arm that reaches or it's her maidservants that reaches, first of all, here's an amazing person, knowing she sees this baby, she sees that he's shining, she sees that he's a Hebrew baby, and she knows what her father's edicts are. She knows it's a Hebrew baby, but she is so filled with compassion for this baby that's in her arms. So whether or not she had the intellect to say, oh, I shouldn't do this, and her maidservants are saying, you can't save this as a Hebrew baby, it has to be killed, in her intellect is pushed to one side, and what takes over is compassion. And so she takes this baby and she adopts this baby. This is an incredible story that she adopts this baby. And we learn, from the stories, that the baby wouldn't nurse from an Egyptian wet nurse. And so she looks around, and lo and behold, here's Miriam, who didn't leave. She's waiting to see what she can do. What's her role? How can she make her prophecy come true? And she goes to get her mother, who then amazingly becomes the wet nurse of her own baby for Pharaoh. So she's getting paid to take care of her own baby in her own home until he's weaned, and then she brings him back to the palace. So here's an incredible unfolding of the story. As much as we might think, oh, there's no hope, Amram, the father of Moses, and Yocheved, the mother of Moses, were very distressed when they knew that they had to they had to somehow move baby Moses out of their home. What's going to happen to him? What's going to be? Is he going to die? They don't know. And yet what happens is an amazing confluence of events happens such that he ends up not only back in her home where she can take care of him until he's weaned, but then he goes into the palace. So she's given him the milk. She's given the mother, Yocheved, has given him this foundation. He goes into the home of Pharaoh and he lives with Batya, his Pharaoh's daughter. So what I want to point out here is that this is an adoption story. This is Moses being adopted by the daughter of Pharaoh. And what she does, apparently, is that she keeps his identity as a Hebrew intact. She raises him to know from where he came. She doesn't take him in and say, right, you're mine. I'm not going to tell you who, I'm going to keep you away from your people. And we know this because when he's older and he goes out and he sees an Egyptian beating an Israelite, he intercedes because the Israelite is his brethren, right? He knows that he's one of these Jewish people and he has compassion and he has mercy on what's going on, and he has a sense of justice and all of this, and he has a sense that this is my brother. Where did he get that from? He got that apparently from Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh. Growing up in the palace has been taught that you, Moses, who Batya names, she names him this name, you are an Israelite. And as much as I'm your adopted mother, and as much as I take care of you, you need to know where you came from. In order to be a healthy, psychologically, put together person, I can't remove you from who you are in your essence, from where you came from. You came from these people, you're part of that people. I, Pharaoh's daughter, get to raise you and give you that education and blah, 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 and do all those things that she does. But at the end of the day, this is a part of who you are. And she doesn't deny him that. And I think it's an amazing lesson in a way to understand this daughter of Pharaoh, how amazing a person she is. And as a reward for teaching him and raising him and giving him a sense of his identity, she is the one who names him Moshe, which means that she drew him out from the water. And what is also amazing is that Moses drawing out, like he gets drawn out of the water, but he's now, in a few minutes, given the task of drawing out the Jewish people from the land of Egypt. That's his task. He's tasked with bringing them out, with drawing them out of the land of Egypt. So his name, to be pulled out of the water, is very apropos. Again, back to the notion that our names are a depiction and a sense of the essence of who we are. So here we have three amazing women. I just want to go over these three amazing women. So we have Miriam, who told her parents not to divorce, who had a prophecy, who had a vision that the Jewish people had to keep procreating, that there was a future for the Jewish people. She pressures her parents to remarry and to continue to have children. We have the midwives who, against the decree of Pharaoh, allow these babies to be born and to help them be born and take care of them and look after them. And then we have Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, who reaches for something. She's reaching for something. So many people talk about whether it's the arm or the maidservants, but the basket that she's reaching for is a little bit out of her reach. It's apparently over there, and she's reaching, and miraculously her arm extends. Whether it's true or not true, I like to think that it is true, that on some level it's a metaphor for our doing. We just do. Like, you have to keep doing. Like, you could say to yourself, well, if I'm going to fail, or it's not going to happen, or like there's all these things that will get in the way and I won't succeed, and we can be very negative self-talk to ourselves. Or we can say, I don't know whether I'll succeed or not, but I know that I have to try, right? So I think Rabbi Tat says that the job that we have isn't to decide whether it's possible or not. Our job is to act, is to just put our best effort in. Our job is to put that next step forward, put our next step forward, keep moving. And whether or not we'll reach the destination is beyond us, right? Whether we can jump over that chasm of self-doubt or jump over the chasm of, I can't see that this will be successful, that's not up to us to decide. It's really I guess there's faith in that to say, if it's going to be successful, it's only because God's taken me the extra way, right? So I can put in all my efforts, but at the end of the day, whether I'm successful or not is not up to me, it's up to God. So when Batya reaches her arm out to get the basket that looks like it's beyond her reach, right? So you could say, intellectually, I can't reach, so I'm not even going to attempt to reach. she doesn't. She attempts, she reaches out, and God takes her beyond, right? So let's just, even in our own lives, say, whether I succeed or not might not be up to me, but what is up to me is whether I attempt, whether I try, whether I put in my best effort, whether I, keep walking forward, keep trying to keep going. So I think that's an important lesson to bring out from Batya, and what she stands for, and how she acts, and what she does. Okay, so she takes this baby. She takes this baby after the mother Yocheved has weaned and goes back, and Moses is grown up in the palace, and then he comes out and he sees this altercation between an Egyptian and an Israelite, and he strikes the Egyptian, and because he identifies with the Israelite. And what I think is an interesting twist here is that one of the things that it says, I don't remember where, is that when he slays the Egyptian, it's literally, he slays the Egyptian to free the Israelite, but on a deeper level, he's slaying the Egyptian within himself. So like that part of us that's inside ourselves that we want to rid of, like how do we get rid of the negativity, or the things that are taking us away from being the fullest, most soulful people that we can? What's pulling us away? What's dragging us down? Like, can we get rid of that side of ourselves? And so whatever it is that the Egyptians represent, whether it's the constrained sense of like I can't do things, or I'm oppressed and I can't be released into a free place, that part of ourselves is something that Moses slays. When he slays that Egyptian, he's slaving the Egyptian inside of himself. He grew up in the palace. He has parts of the Egyptian culture in him because he grew up there, and he has all those influences that influenced him, and he's an Israelite. Like, he has these two identities. He has the house of Pharaoh that he grew up in, but he also has his identity in his Israelite, and he becomes the Israelite when he slays that Egyptian. He's pushing that Egyptian side of himself away and saying, I have to be, in order to really. And he doesn't know that he's going to be asked to lead the Jewish people out of Egypt, but in order to really be fully an Israelite and fully take care of his own people, he has to shed that Egyptian side of himself, which is like metaphorically and literally he slays this Egyptian. Next day he comes out, two Israelites are fighting, he intercedes to try to create peace. They say, are you going to slay us like you did the Egyptians? He's scared, he knows now it's news that he killed an Egyptian, and he runs away, and he goes to the Midian, to the land of Midian, where he meets these daughters of the priest there, Jethro, and he helps them. As I mentioned, that he steps in to help them when they're being abused by some locals at the well, and he steps in to help them. Again, Moses, who sees injustice, he sees, and he doesn't just walk away, and he doesn't look away. He looks at it straight in the eye. There's an injustice here. I have to act. He acts, and he helps these Midianite, these daughters of Jethro. He ends up marrying one of them, Zipporah, and then he becomes the shepherd to Jethro, his father-in-law. And as I mentioned, we had this little sheep that strayed. He goes after the sheep, and while he's out shepherding and he's going after this one little stray sheep that we just talked about, he sees this bush that is burning. And now we have the episode of the burning bush. And he sees this bush is aflame, and it's not being consumed. So, number one, he's able to see. There's an aspect of us, of humanity, and how much we see what's in front of our eyes. Can we see what's in front of our eyes? Are we too busy on our phones? Are we too busy in our own minds? And are we really aware of what's going on around us? And here's Moses, who could very easily apparently have walked right by this bush and not seen it. The way it's depicted in pictures and so on, it looks like really obvious that there's this bush that's burning, but apparently it was an act on his part to consciously be aware of his surroundings and consciously see that there was a bush and that it was burning and it wasn't being consumed. So there's an aspect of him being like tuned in, like he's looking around, and in the heart, it's such a nice imagery, in the heart of this bush there's fire, and there's God in the fire. There's an angel first, and there's God in this fire. And God says, take off your shoes. This is a holy place. This is the first prophecy that Moses has. This is the first time that God communicates with Moses. And Moses becomes a prophet like no other. He's a prophet that speaks to God like we say it face to face. Don't really know what that means, that he has prophecy without it being clouded, without being in a sleep state, without being in a dream. He's fully conscious, he's awake, he's alert, he's able to transparently have talk. He can come to God and talk to God, doesn't need to have God come to him. Like, he is unparalleled in all of our history as a prophet like no other. He is a prophet that has this ability to converse with God wherever, whenever, and it's direct, and his prophecies are not disputed. So we have that as a tenet of our faith, that Moses is a prophet like no other, and there will be no prophet like Moses ever again. This episode at the burning bush, where God tells him, take off your shoes. He says, take off your shoes. I love this. And I want to talk about the idea of shoes, and why it is that we take off our shoes. And if you go on Har Bayit, you take off your shoes. If you go behind the Western Wall, it's controversial whether you can go up there, or people do, people don't, whatever. You go very up to where the temple in Jerusalem stood, and where the Holy of Holies is, where we're not allowed to go, but there are other places that we now know you can go. But there's an idea of taking your shoes off in a place of holiness. So what's this idea of taking your shoes off? So our soul, we know that we have a soul, and our soul is carried in the world by our bodies. Our body is the vessel that carries the soul. So we are souls that have bodies that are the garments, that are the clothing for the soul. So our soul is clothed in our bodies, so that the soul and the spiritual soul and the physical body that are antithetical to each other, that are like water and oil can't mix, they can mix, right? Our soul and body somehow have a capacity to stay locked in. As long as we're given the gift of life, we can stay locked together, and we are able to exist in this world, physical beings with a spiritual soul, right? The soul can't exist in the world without the body, and the body can't exist in the world without the soul. So we are joined through life together. So the shoes are to the body what the body is to the soul. So in the soul houses the soul is brought into the body and is housed by the body, and the body is locked into the world by shoes. When we take our shoes off, we're able to elevate ourselves. It's an idea that taking off your shoes is as if we're taking off our body so that our soul can shine. Take off your shoes is like taking away your body and exposing the soul. So taking off your shoes allows us to access our spirituality more. And shoes become a covering for the soul. So the more we kind of turn our back on God, and the more we become more and more physical, and the more kind of like we surround ourselves only with physical things, the less in touch with our spiritual nature we are. And what God is saying to Moses at the burning bush is, take off your shoes, like get rid of some of that physicality so we can have a spiritual conversation, you Moses and me God. And so this is the kind of idea of what's happening when he takes off his shoes at the burning bush. And he has a conversation with God, and God says, you have to, you are the one I'm choosing to go and to lead the Jewish people out of their bondage. And Moses argues, and he says, who am I, and who are you? And there's a conversation with God and Moses about names. Moses says to God, what's your name? Who are you? Who am I going to tell the Jewish people who you are? Right? I need a name, right? It's very interesting. Go back to the Jacob story where he struggles with the angel, and he says, well, what's your name? Like, a lot of times in the Torah, we have, again, this idea of names and the importance of names. So God says, so Moses says to God, behold, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what's his name? What will I say to them? Okay, so Moses is saying to God, who are you? What's your name? What's the essence of who you are? How can I tell the Jewish people that I'm coming? You've been gone for a while. Nobody knows you're here. How am I going to tell them who you are? And he says, I shall be as I shall be. I shall be. Tell them, I shall be has sent me to you. I shall be. Future. It's a future tense. It's a, I'm going to be with you. I am with you in your suffering. I will be with you in your redemption. I will be with you through Jewish history. I'm going to take you. I'm going to be with you. Just like Joseph, when he went down, when he was sold into the pit and he went down to Egypt and he was sold into slavery, etc. He knew God was with him. God says, I'm with you. I'm here. I'm with you all the way. And I think that, again, as a believing person and as a person who is immersed in trying to understand what this all means, I think that this is something very worth pondering, is our relation, each one of us, is his relationship to God and our sense that God is with us, and how through our painful struggles of life we can still hold on to God and say, God's here and I need you and I'm with you and he's with us, and be that presence for other people, right? So we're enjoined to be God-like. So if God is with us, then we should be with other people. And again, it gets back to the idea of Moses not being a bystander and not turning away, and Miriam does it, and her mother and their mother does it, Yochebed does it, and Batya does it. These are people in this week's Torah portion who don't turn away. They are sharing in they're empathetic, and they're sharing in the suffering and pain of others, which is antithetical to the Pharaoh. Pharaoh is into himself and very selfish. And these other people that we're learning about now, again, Yocheved and Miriam, the midwives, and Miriam, his sister, Moses' sister, and Batya and Moses, who will not turn away and are part of the story and I want to be part of the story and I'm not going to let go of the story. I forgot to say something about the reward that the midwives got for not killing the Jewish babies at birth, and I want to say this. So they were rewarded with houses. What's that got to do with anything? So I heard an analogy. So there was and I think it would even be very apropos to my own experience, that I have a grandson and a granddaughter who were born very early. They were born 3 months early, and they were in the NICU for 3 months, and one of them died. Very sad, very, very sad. And the other one survived. And a week later, after his sister died, he was strong enough and he came home. And the nurses that had taken care of these children, they were twins obviously, were really beloved to us. You know, they had really taken care of these little children, and they were a lot of care that they needed in the beginning, and all the way through they needed so much care, and there was so much kindness that was done to them by these nurses and the doctors. And you think, what can I give them? What can I reward them with? Like, how do I show my gratitude to these people for taking care? Like, do they need another box of chocolates? Do they need, another bunch of flowers? What's really going to show them how important their work is? And one of the answers to that is going back to the hospital with this little boy who's now 4. He's now 4, and he's healthy and smart, and okay, fine, I'm his grandmother. But to take him back to the NICU and show the nurses this 4-year-old was that baby that's in the NICU now, in that incubator. And it makes me cry. But what amazing, how beautiful for that nurse to see the 4-year-old emerge from the incubator. And right, so if you just turn away and say, okay, fine, my work's done, and move away. So my daughter to take that baby, that child now, back to the hospital and show him to the nurses and show him to the doctors and say, your work produced this, okay, all right, but you were an integral part of the development of this child who's so beautiful and so healthy and so everything that he is. You have a hand in that, a huge hand in his survival, in his thriving, in his life. And I'm bringing him back to show you. What greater reward could there be for those nurses and doctors but to see that 4-year-old come back, or the 10-year-old, or the 20-year-old, whatever, and to say, your work is not in vain. Your work was really important, and it's better than a box of chocolates, right? It's better than a bunch of flowers, is to show you what your work did. And when Shifra and Puah, these midwives, were rewarded by quote-unquote houses, they were rewarded with people coming from them who had, who were the leaders, who were the kings and the priests and the Leviim that came from these women, because they feared God and because they didn't kill the babies. They feared God more than they feared the human tyrant of Pharaoh. And the reward is houses. The reward for, so to speak, for taking care of our little grandbaby, this little baby in the hospital, is seeing the fruits of your labor. The fruits of your labor are the healthy baby that comes back to visit. The fruits of your labor, to the midwives, is this nation that's going to exist because you didn't kill, you didn't succumb, you held up, you were just and right, and you were attached to God, and you did what God says, not what man says. So that's a huge lesson, right? So Shifra and Puah and the shepherds and not trespassing, and I will be. God's going to go with us into the future. The idea of Moses being full of gratitude, that he doesn't want to, he's so humble, he doesn't want to take this role. Who am I to do this? There are other people better than me, more eloquent than me. And I think, if we just close here with the idea of what it means to be a leader, and how he's a leader, but he's not like this leader that's so charismatic. You think, well, only leaders can be charismatic. Well, Moses had a stutter, and he had, whatever he had, but he was not the charismatic leader. He was more of a stutterer, and he had a steep speech impairment. He grew up in the house of Pharaoh, but he didn't forget his identity and his nation. And he had the courage to stand up to Pharaoh when he comes back at the end of this week's Torah portion, where he accepts, or he doesn't have a choice to do what God tells him. You are going to be the Redeemer of the Jewish people. You are my mouthpiece. You're going to go. We are now partners. You and Aaron are going to go, and you're going to go to Pharaoh, and you're going to stand up to Pharaoh, and you're going to be that role of leader, bring the Jewish people out. And he's able to work with Aaron and Miriam, and he has no competitive envy or anything. He and Aaron and Miriam, these three siblings, are able to work so beautifully together. We had that back in last week's Torah portion with Manasseh and Ephraim, who were the children of Joseph, how they had no sibling rivalry. They didn't hate, they didn't envy, they weren't competitive. And now we see it again in Moses and Aaron and the sister Miriam, that they were able to work together for this common goal. That he stayed faithful to his people, like a good leader stays faithful to his people. He doesn't jump ship. Staying faithful to the people. There's stories in the Holocaust there was a story of this rabbi who ran an orphanage, and at some point he was given the opportunity to leave. And he says, I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to leave. I'm going to go with these children. Wherever they go, I go. And there's a story of them being carted off, and he's with them, and he's singing Shema as all these children are going to the gas chambers, whatever. But I'm not letting go. I'm faithful to my people. I'm faithful to my family. I'm faithful to whatever you're faithful to. That these are the leaders. This is what it means to be a leader. And Moses was this kind of leader, and he didn't attribute any of the success that he had himself. Right? He was just an emissary. It's all God. It's all God. Joseph showed us that, it's all God. And here again, Moses, as a quintessential leader, does not attribute the success to himself. So Moses represents a leader who's able to stand up for justice, who is not charismatic necessarily, who cooperates with others and isn't jealous and envious, stays faithful to the people that he's leading, and doesn't attribute the success to himself. So the humility and the gratitude are what we know of as Moses, our leader, that he is the most humble of people, and he is a prophet like no other, and he is an emissary coming to bring the redemption about. So I think that is pretty much what I wanted to say, and it's really good because it's 9:00. So let's just recap. And so the idea of our name, how important our name is, how it is an expression of the essence of who we are, how each one of us is like a star in the cosmos, the billions of stars that exist in the cosmos is like going to be like the Jewish people, and that we are all one star, and we each have, and each one is unique, and each one has an individual light to shine out into the world, and just like Moses doesn't let any sheep wander off. They all stay part of the collective. We want to bring everybody back together. Everybody has to be part of this beautiful flock that is the Jewish people, and we're not going to let go of anybody, right? We have Chabad on the moon. We have Chabad in, rural Mongolia, finding the Jewish people, bring them back, bring everybody back. So we're part of one flock, and we can look out for each other, and we're not going to abandon each other. We're going to be responsible for each other. We are responsible for each other. We are a people who are compassionate and pursue justice and look after each other. And we're laying down the foundation of who we are as a Jewish people. It's being laid down as we go through these stories. Genesis is the book of creation. Shemot is the book of Numbers, but it's the book of redemption. It's the book of the Jewish people going from a family to a nation, but when we were still a family, we still think of ourselves as family. I mentioned this movie, Harriet. I recommend it a lot, and it was very funny. My children were sitting next to this Jewish couple, and on one of the captions it came up that some of this was happening they were in New Jersey, and so this couple were talking very loudly to each other about New Jersey, and then, like, did they know anybody in New Jersey? And we want to know, like, who do you know? And then we do a lot of Jewish geography amongst each other, because we're like we're all connected, and this sense of connected to each other, and sense of being part of a flock, or a part of a people. And so as we travel through the book of Genesis, as we go deeper into the enslavement, and then we come out the other side with Moses as our leader, with Moses, Aaron, and Miriam as our leaders. But seeing the beginning of Moses, who was born with a certain light that shone into the world, and that he had a certain neshama, very high neshama, that was put into his body to achieve his goals. But to say that each one of us has our own neshama, and each one of us has what we have to do in the world, and we each have an important role to play. So but I'll end with a blessing that we should all somehow shed our shoes so that we can get in touch more with our spiritual side, and shine that more into the world, and continue to act in ways that are just, act in ways that are good, and continue to be part of the history and the unfolding of what will be in the future for the Jewish people. Have a